Before we begin today's case, if you enjoy our content, like the video, comment, and subscribe to our channel. It will really help us out as we are just getting started. Now, let us dive into today's case. Today, we are going to discuss the story of 6-year-old Tae. While he was playing outside, someone threw acid that ultimately ended his life. The only witness was the boy himself, and through many interviews, he tried to describe who did it. But many experts are conflicted on distinguishing between a child's made-up story and the real scenario. This case happened in the Daegu area of Korea. It was May 20th, 1999, where a healthy little 6-year-old, Tae-Wan, but we're going to call him Tae for this episode, just came out of his mother's salon, grabbed his bags, and started walking down his usual street to go to the academy. He was so excited to learn when all of a sudden he was grabbed from the back by an unknown man who forced his mouth open and poured acid. This was a terrifying acid attack on an innocent 6-year-old. You might be wondering why a child was walking down the street alone? Well, actually, in these kinds of small towns, usually their families and neighborhoods all work and live in that same small neighborhood, and I believe the academy was probably a very short walk. So the parents really didn't think much of it, especially back in the 90s. With excruciating pain, Tae ran as far as he could and finally fell on the nearby pole. The acid was so strong that it made the cement black, burned all his clothes and his skin, especially his eyes, throat, and mouth area. Witnesses saw little Tae crying and got him to the hospital. When he got there, they found out that he had third-degree burns on 40% of his body, especially having the worst burns on his face. Doctors said that the burns were so bad that he had a 5% chance of surviving. His parents did everything they could to question Tae and get him to talk so that they could figure out who had done this. Going through the tapes, it was evident that he was in excruciating pain, and they were trying to ask the 6-year-old for detailed information about what happened, who he saw, and who he heard. In total, the parents recorded over 300 minutes of Tae speaking about the day he was attacked. With his weak little voice, the mother asked who he was talking to. The mom also asked what he did before the incident, such as, "Remember, you went to your aunt's house. You went for some errands." And things like that, asking him basic questions to see if the child was in the right mind to answer further questions. So it seems like Tae right now has a good memory and recalls everything. Then the mom asked what happened after. He even recalled the exact spot where it happened. One important detail, he said, was that the man had a black plastic bag while he was throwing the acid. This was very vital information, but the police didn't believe the little boy. Without any scientific experiment or explanations, the police just said, "You can't carry acid in a plastic bag. It's going to melt the plastic bag." But they found out later through private testing that acid does not melt through plastic. I'm not a scientist, but they say that acid only burns through things with oxygen, like our skin and clothes. But plastic, polyester, and things like that don't contain oxygen, and that's why it doesn't burn through plastic bags. When the mom asked, "Did you see anyone? Did you see anyone on that street before it happened?"
누구 봤는데? 응? 아저씨 봤어?
So, who was Mr. Kim? Mr. Kim was someone who also lived in the neighborhood and ran a fried chicken restaurant. It was said that Tae himself also knew Mr. Kim very well, and the person who actually took Tae to the hospital was Mr. Kim. To make sure what Tae was saying was true, the mother asked the same question on multiple different occasions. And the only person that he said he saw and heard was Mr. Kim. Was Tae, in his little 6-year-old mind, saying this just to make up someone he knows to comfort himself? Or was it something he really saw and heard? To even confirm further, the mother would ask, "Did you see your dad? Did you see Mr. So-and-so?" and he said no to all those questions. But whenever Mr. Kim came up, he always said yes. Police did interview Mr. Kim, but they say that they didn't really find much. According to the police, he went through 2 different interviews, and again, they didn't really find anything suspicious. Mr. Kim claims that he was inside his restaurant on the phone at 10:39 a.m., then on the phone again at 11:25 a.m. So the police thought, hey, he was in the shop, he was on the phone. But the attack happened at around 11:05 a.m. Could he have done this within that 30-minute time frame? He also claims that when he was inside the shop working, he heard a child scream, and he also heard another man's name calling Tae out. When he went outside, that's when he discovered Tae sitting in the pole crying. Here is a little bit of contradiction to Mr. Kim's statement. It wasn't actually Mr. Kim who discovered Tae first. There was a woman who was inside her store nearby, and she heard a child crying and she discovered Tae first. That woman claims that she remembers Mr. Kim coming from the opposite direction of his shop. But Mr. Kim claims that he just went around the woman and came like this, which is one of the reasons why it seemed like he was coming from a different direction. Here is a little bit of contradiction to Mr. Kim's statement. It wasn't actually Mr. Kim who discovered Tae first. There was a woman who was inside her store nearby, and she heard a child crying, and she discovered Tae first. That woman claims that she remembers Mr. Kim coming from the opposite direction of his shop. But Mr. Kim claims that he just went around the woman and came like this, which is one of the reasons why it seemed like he was coming from a different direction. Overall, police were pretty much claiming that Tae was a 6-year-old child, so his memories are blurred between made-up things, comfort, and reality. It was crazy because if you hear what one of the police officers said, he said, "I can't just listen to one side." It also feels like Tae's mother is just pushing on one suspect. The police got even more angry. There was also another witness who was Tae's friend, and when they tried to get him as a witness, he again pointed to Mr. Kim from the pictures, saying he was there before the attack happened. But according to the police, because Tae's friend was disabled and hearing impaired, the police decided to dismiss him as a witness. It took literally 4 months to get Mr. Kim's clothes that he wore that day. Come to find out, his shoes and clothing also had acid on them. Supposedly, the contaminated clothes and shoes came all bunched together. So Mr. Kim claimed that, number one, he was the one who took Tae to the hospital. So obviously, he's also going to have acid on his clothes and shoes. Number two, the police said that the shoes and clothes came in all contaminated together. So technically, the acid on the shoes or clothing could have gotten mixed up. They can't tell if this acid was from the attack or from him actually bringing Tae to the hospital. So even the evidence went to trash. It is possible that because Mr. Kim probably grabbed the child, he could have gotten acid on himself as well. But other experts believe that the way his clothes were stained wasn't correlating with someone who was just helping someone and got acid on their clothes. But again, that was never proven. That was just something said way later on. If the suspect was Mr. Kim, what could have been the possible motive? This is a small town where everybody knows everybody. So it was found out that Mr. Kim had a very hard time with money and was really struggling. He went around the neighborhood asking others to borrow money. Eventually, Mr. Kim started asking Tae's aunts and uncle to borrow a large sum of money, which the family declined. It was said that Mr. Kim even went on his knees to beg Tae's uncle to borrow the amount of money. When the family declined, he decided to pour his anger and revenge on their family. As you could see from these tapes, you see Tae doing everything he can and trying to make it as far. Unfortunately, he survived for only 49 days and eventually passed away. One of the only witnesses was Tae, the little boy himself. Tae's friend was interviewed 15 years later, and he now claims that he doesn't remember much about the incident since it's been so long. After the case had no credible witnesses and Tae himself passed away, this case went cold. Years later, Still seeking justice, the parents were able to get the attention of documentaries and media, providing a couple of experts. There are many complicated factors to this because people believe that children could obviously have real facts and memories. They could have been coerced by someone like a parent. They could have heard something on TV or from someone else and made up these imaginations. Or it could be a comfort thing where they just named someone they know closest. But all of these experts agree that Tae was most likely naming the real scenario of what happened that day. Experts say usually when a child repeats the same answers in different forms, it's not just a child making things up or being coerced, and it is most likely the honest truth. Another odd thing was that Tae didn't talk about the woman who found him when he was crying on the pole. He only repeated that he heard Mr. Kim's voice multiple times. But remember, Mr. Kim claimed that he was inside his shop working when he heard a child screaming. So, the documentary wanted to prove if it was possible for him to hear a child scream all the way from his shop. They used this sound technology, which is equivalent to the max volume a child could scream, around 80 decibels, and all the way from his chicken shop. You can't hear that scream. Also, other witnesses claimed that they never heard the child scream, only when the child was at the pole crying. The really difficult part was that when they asked Tae if he saw the face of the man that attacked him, unfortunately, Tae said he didn't see the face. In conclusion, even the child experts in the documentary concluded that they couldn't confirm if Mr. Kim was a suspect or a possible vital witness, but they couldn't rule it out either. Any of you watching are child experts? Do you think that Tae was naming Mr. Kim because he was just comfortable with him, like an uncle? Or do you think he really heard his voice? 15 years later, only a couple of days before the statute of limitations, the family wanted to meet with the police to get a reevaluation and reopen the case. Unfortunately, the police said that because there aren't enough witnesses, they can't do anything about it, and that Tae's statements are not enough. The last thing the family could do was a demonstration, standing outside of the court and trying to get some attention. In 2014, Tae's father sued Mr. Kim for his connection to Tae's case. I'm sure the father couldn't just watch this case go cold, but unfortunately, due to lack of evidence, the case was dismissed and remains a cold case even today. But one good thing really did happen. Because of Taiwan's case, the family was able to pass something called Taiwan's Law, which allowed certain murder cases that happened after August 2000 to abolish the statute of limitations. Due to this law and having the statute of limitations abolished, police were able to solve multiple murder cases, multiple cold cases, including the infamous poison case, because of Tae's law. Unfortunately, this law passed after the statute of limitations on Tae's cold case. So technically, even if police were able to find who did this today, they couldn't prosecute the suspect. Remember to share this video with your friends so that we could all talk about this story and hopefully solve it one day. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next case.
태연이도 잘 자. 엄마 보고 있을게.